So welcome everyone again. It's good to see you all. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Our first speaker is Ruthie Kaplan, who is a returning Azrieli Fellow. Ruthie was with us as an architecture fellow doing her MA a number of years ago. And now she's come back to us as a PhD, a graduate studies fellow. But as you said before, Ruthie, you broke the statistics because you have now moved from architecture to history. And Ruthie is coming to us from the Department of Jewish History at the University of Haifa, where she'll be speaking today on the interwoven urban fabric, exploring Jewish urban life in textile town Lodz. And I'm going to boast my knowledge, Lodz is pronounced Wodz, correct? Okay.
Yes, it would. It took me a lot of time to practice Lodz back because I'm so used to saying Wodz now, but yeah. Okay, so should I start?
Please do, yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm Ruthie. I'm an architect, but I'm here as a PhD student at Haifa University, Department of Jewish History. And you probably ask yourself, how did I get from being an architect to researching a Jewish community in Poland? Is it okay? Do you see my screen? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll first tell you my story. I was working as an architect for a few years. I was just after passing my registration exam and after the birth of my second child. And I decided to go on with higher education, but I didn't want to go back to architecture school. I wanted to do something different. And I registered for second degree in design in Shenkar College, and I majored weaving. And as I was presenting my work at the end of the year, one of the professors asked me a similar question. What's an architect doing in first year's weaving class? I told him that my grandmother, this is my grandmother on my wedding day, she came from a family of weavers. She used to tell us about it. It really interested me. And he asked me about the origins of my grandmother's family. I said, she came from Lodz. He asked me, you're an architect and you don't research Lodz? This is a city that was built around the textile industry with factories and palaces for industrialists. And I went to see what he was talking about, and I saw that indeed Lodz attracted many researchers, being a unique East industrial city, but it was also the home for the second largest Jewish community in pre-war Poland, after Warsaw, the capital. And so I found myself back at the Technion with an Azrieli Fellowship, researching the space of the Jewish community of Lodz in books, and also on the streets before the pandemic, of course. And now, after this introduction, seeing these two photographs, I would like to ask you, which one of them is a Jewish street? Now, because we're on Zoom, I'll have to answer that myself and tell you that both of the streets are Jewish streets. It is reasonable to think of the street on the right as a Jewish street, a shtetl-like street where the lower class lived in a Jewish sphere. And there were many streets like that in Lodz, sorry. What was an extension of the Jewish district, the confined Jewish district at the 19th century, it became a huge Jewish area. And it is easier to research a place where a lot of Jewish people live in. But as deeper as I got, I found what I believe is a treasure. These are text records of the Jewish community from the interwar period. And these people, most of the people that were living on this street could not pay tax. Tax was paid to support them. So I know that this is a source that holds information of middle and upper class. I also have an address book of the city, the entire city, and I know from literature that middle class were usually registered in address books. So I have two sources that hold information of middle and upper class. And now I want to ask questions regarding the speciality of the Jewish middle class of Lodz. Where did they live and how did they feel about their place of living? We'll see the basics of the methodology and we'll move on to examples. And I'm working in two paths to answer these two questions. In order to answer the first question, I need to process the data. And so we trained the computer to read the data, and I added some information of my own, some questions. If you'd like, we'll discuss how I did it, but it's too complicated to explain now. And from this information, I can map the Jewish middle class in Lodz. But in order to answer the second question, I need more information, more individual information, and I have ego documents. I'm currently working with memoirs and oral testimonies. I'm hoping to get to work with diaries as well. And when reading the text, I'm trying to extract descriptions of how people define their area, how they define the street. And from that, I would like to get an impression of the city. Eventually, I'm hoping to combine the two maps together. So let's see some examples. This is a delineation of the Jewish middle class settlement. I took here 1921 and 1931. This is from the text records, and 1939 from the address book. These are the same maps. The left one is a fiscal map and the right one are heat maps. And you can see in the heat maps that it wasn't only that the Jewish middle class settlement had grown and spread, but it also desegregated. We can see it in the yellow dots. This is an example, another example, not from the text records or the address book. This is a notice for the elections for the Jewish community leadership in 1931. The table that you see in the notice, these are addresses for the polling stations where people can vote. So I mapped these polling stations on top of the Jewish middle class settlement in 1931. And you can see that the polling stations are scattered all across town. And this is important for me because I thought that the polling stations would be located in the more traditional area, the traditional Jewish area where the Jewish institutions were, but they were scattered all over town. So it means that both Jewish inhabitants and their leadership felt comfortable in 1931 using all parts of town. If we go deeper into the street that we saw before, this is the same street, different years. The photograph on the right is from before the First World War, and the photograph on the left is at the 30s. And in this short street, there were 33 plots only, but there were 500 inhabitants, most of them Jewish. But moreover, there were 700 businesses registered in this short street in the address book. And so today it's not very hard to imagine how work is interfering with our personal lives and the opposite. But try to imagine living in a one-bedroom apartment that holds not only your family and yourself, but also sewing machines, weaving looms, workers that came into the house, customers that came in and out. And so I can start to imagine the urban life of Jewish people, but also of the rest of the people living in the city. And I want to complete it with the ego documents. Pavel Podemsky, in his memoirs, wrote, "My mother was delighted with her apartment because it was located at the center of town. In a short walking distance, there were the municipal offices, the Jewish institutions, cinemas, and theaters. However, we lived in a distinct Jewish area." Let's see the text. So Pavel Podemsky describes the area that his family was living in, but he also describes a sense of belonging to this place. And so there were descriptions that I was looking for, but also the text gave me some descriptions that I didn't think of before. And I had these descriptions as a base, and I'm trying, when reading the text, to find these descriptions and then to try to build a picture of how people, what they saw, how they lived in their personal lives. So I would like to conclude with going back to my grandmother, that before leaving Lodz as a 17 years old girl, she was living in the poor traditional area. I didn't find almost any of her family, not in the address book and not on the tax records, but she'd only sent me to this journey. And in this journey, I was able to find a very large and important part of a very large and important community, the space of the middle class of the Jewish middle class of Lodz. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'd really love to hear your comments and questions. And we're doing it now, right? The questions.
Yes.
Okay. So stop share.
Thank you, Ruthie. That was lovely.
Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Mona.
No. Someone raised their hand. Zohar or Einat? I think. Yeah, Einat. You know, I was in Warsaw several years ago. There was a joint conference between the Polish and the Israeli societies for biochemistry and molecular biology. So I took the opportunity to go to the Jewish cemetery. And this was a wow experience. I mean, every tomb was the name of a street from Tel Aviv. I mean, each one of them. I knew the families. It was amazing. And then the names of the streets that were renovated on an area that was totally wiped off this earth where the ghetto was. It was quite an experience. And nobody ever called me Koshepanye until I came there. So that was an experience too. Yeah.
Actually, if I may say, I'm learning Polish for the past 5 years, and I noticed that a lot of sentences in Hebrew, words and sentences come from Polish. So when you say you saw all the streets of Tel Aviv in the graveyard there, I see how the Polish culture got into the Israeli culture. People brought it from there.
Yeah, did you read the book of Jacob by Olga Tokarczuk?
No, but I learned a lot about her.
You definitely should. So she won a Nobel Prize for a book where she thanks her mother for correcting her errors in Jewish history. So her mother is half Jewish, I learned. So that's how she was brought to study the last 300 years of Jewish history in Central Europe. Extremely interesting. It's a heavy book, but it's worth reading.
I will.
I have a question.
Oh, please.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to ask if when looking at the documents, so everything that you were showing now is all in Polish, is there not sort of the equivalent Yiddish, or was Yiddish typically associated with the lower classes, or kind of does that distinction come up at all? It's just fascinating.
I did learn some Yiddish as well. There are many documents in Yiddish as well. It was talked not only by the lower class, also by middle and higher class, and also by Poles and Germans that were living in Lodz. The languages were very mixed there. The whole community, the whole population was mixed. And I know of Poles that were speaking Yiddish, Jews that were speaking German and Polish. So everything was really mixed there. So yes, I have The documents are in Polish because that was the language. Actually, when I was working on the 19th century, it was in Russian. So because of the authority. So it depends. Polish changed many hands during the years. So there were many languages there. But yeah, the official language is Polish, but there's also Yiddish and Hebrew.
Ruthie, I noticed that one of the books that you had on your presentation, one of the memoirs that or diaries that you've been using, is a memoir that was published by the Azrieli Foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and find it helpful. I see that you're finding the personal stories. What are you doing? You're comparing them to the you're sort of cross-cataloging them, trying to find out where they
trying is a good word because I'm trying. I still don't know how to do it, but some memoirs have really addresses. Like this Feivel Podemski, he said, we were living on Południowa 20, and I can put him on the map. And he talks about the places that his family used to walk to, where the bakery that they owned used to be. And so I can see the streets that he was walking in. I have different testimonies like that I really know where they went. Some memoirs and testimonies just speak generally of how they lived. It's also important because one is talking about the apartment building that he was living in, and he says he's talking about this so many different people that were living there from different classes, and I know from the tax records that indeed people were living in the same building but from different levels of socioeconomical background. So I'm trying to combine the cold material that I have with the individual material. So
fascinating.
I don't know yet how I'm going to finalize it, but
I can imagine the book that will come out of this. And I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ruthie. I think I'm just looking at the time. Thank you. It was really great.